And welcome to the Timberpad Pro tutorial series. This is video number 2, in which we will be starting our cruise and working with the Tally tab. So before we get started, I would like to remind you that this is an emulator environment where I'm using the software on a Windows computer. In the case that you're using it on Android phone or device, you'll see different behavior than this. We're going to run into some wonky behavior here. Just fair warning. And let's get started. So because this is the first time that we started up the application, we have no existing data set. Our first plot is going to be 0 and the tree will be 0. So this comes in as a reminder that is a placeholder for our data set so that we don't have an empty data set. It gives us something to add to. In this case, I'm going to delete it so that we can start with plot number 1. This is good practice, but not something that you have to do. If you want to use plot 0, that's a possibility. So before we get into this setup tab, let's go over to the Tally tab. That will be clicking on the middle tab of the top there, and it will highlight yellow when you go to it. So this Tally tab is where we're going to collect our tree and plot information. I'm just going to click delete here because the only record is active, and then click yes. And now we have wiped out all of our records. We have nothing. Now I can create a new plot in this tab, or if I have a GPS enabled on my device, I can, in the Setup tab, click the Plot plus GPS button. This is a good option as well in case you're going to change your stocking level or your plot comment, and it lets you see your XY coordinates and that they came through. Again, because I'm doing this on a Windows computer, I don't have a GPS and therefore I'm not getting the coordinates, but most people will if they have a GPS enabled on their device. So now that we have our first plot, the next step is to put in the project name. This is something that will stick with your data set when you import and export. It's also important that you find a way to make it unique. So if I were to just have a single My Woodlot cruise and continue appending data to that cruise, then it would work fine to have this single name. If I'm going to change my data set, for example, I want to keep separate days. I went Monday and then Tuesday, I want to have a different file just to save and export and back up my data. What I can do is put a date in the file name, the project name rather, which will transfer into a different name in the file name for the exported data set. So that's just a little trick to keep in mind. The stand, strata, or type is something that, as with many things in this program, as long as you are consistent, you can do a lot of the things that you would like to with this. So I could number my stand here, I could give it a unique name, or I could use a timber typing, such as hardwood, saw timber, something like that. In this case, I'm just going to say this is the back 40 of my woodlot. So the acreage is going to be 40 in this case, but that can be any range of integer values. If I want to change a stocking level or plot comment, I can do so here. I'm going to say this plot was average stocking. This is one of those fields that as long as you're consistent, it doesn't matter what you use it for. It doesn't factor into the importing process of tall timber analysis. The tall timber software uses a smaller subset of data than is available within Timberpad for collection. So if you want to use this for regeneration sampling, that's acceptable. If you want to use this for the overall stocking of the stand around you and off the plot, that's fine too. It's up to your imagination here. The same thing goes for plot comment. If you want to say something about what you walk through to get to the plot, or certain characteristics of the plot, or even a name, if it's a row and column identification of a plot grid that you want to put in here, that's a great place to put it. Before we move out of the Setup tab, let's just take a look at this bottom section here, where I can turn my warnings off and on. This will stop the pop-up boxes coming up when I'm deleting files, or if I were to leave a field blank, which we'll talk about as an option in a moment. The other thing is the multi-product and the saw pulp height radio buttons here. Only one of them can be depressed at one time, as why it is a radio button. And the multi-product is what we're going to stick with in this video. In a future video, we'll go over the saw pulp height mode, The only thing that I would like to stress at this point is that you not switch back and forth within a cruise. There's a possibility for corrupting your dataset if you do so. So if you've got one, stick with it for that cruise. If you want to use the other one, TTimber, if you're going to use that as your data processor, will allow the combination of two data sets that have the separate merchandising options. So let's get moving into the Tally tab. That's up at the top of the screen, and again, just clicking on that will highlight it yellow and bring us to that tab. So here's our plot 1, tree 1, and we'll look at a couple of the options and cover making the plot data in another video. So here is, as I had alluded to before, the Plot Plus button that will add a plot without GPS information. The Tree Plus button, which will add a new tree to the same plot with a blank record set. The Tree Duplicate button, which will add another tree record but with the same species information already filled out. And the Delete, which we've become familiar with. The rest of these fields we'll cover in the next video, and they work to increase the amount of information that you have on a tree with each step. So one of the questions that we get often is, what is the minimum amount of information that I need to make this program work? So if you're just going to use Timberpad to output an Excel file for you to process and use for your own information, like you might do in a pen and paper cruise, it is an option for you to turn off the warnings and simply select a species or an acceptable or unacceptable growing stock, things like that. You do not have to give a merchantable height as long as you're not planning on importing this information into TTimber Cruise Processor. If you are planning on bringing it into TTimber Cruise Processor, there's a few things that we require, but again, there's more options for inclusion than you need to get it into the analysis. So if you're going to look for a output from TTimber, what we need is a species identification, a diameter, a product. This is either multi-product or saw pulp height, which we'll cover in the next video. And a top diameter, it can be left blank or as a value 0 if necessary. And you have the option of leaving the acceptable, unacceptable growing stock buttons blank. And reps, the default is 1 for 1 repetition per each tree record. So as long as you're collecting a species, a diameter, a product, and either setting the top to 0 or leaving it at the default of 4 inches, you can get your information into TTimber. So thank you for watching, and in the next video we'll be adding trees to this plot.